Okay, good evening. Tonight I'll be introducing the second full length book that we'll be reading this semester. It is called, hold this book up here, it is called Create Dangerously The Immigrant Artist at Work by Haitian American author Iwich Danticott. So tonight I'll be introducing a little bit of the book, some of the background information on Danticott as an author, a little bit of background of the book so we can kind of get acclimated to the book here. Also, while I'm doing this lecture, refer to this article that I posted in the materials section. It's a little news article about Ewich Danticott visiting Kansas University or the University of Kansas, where her book was chosen in 2018 as a common book for the first year students entering the University of Kansas. So I'll talk a little bit about that article as part of the introduction. So basically, Create Dangerously, the immigrant artist at work. It's going to be a little bit more challenging. I know the Glass Castle book was very accessible. I think a lot of you could relate to some of the family issues, and it's very easy to get into with author. This book is a little bit tougher, especially the first chapter. You know, Danticott is actually a Haitian American. She's also a professor of English, a college teacher too. So she also writes in a very complicated way in the beginning. But I think the first chapter is really good because it introduces some of the themes, the common themes that she's going to be talking about in her book. So it's very important, but it's also a very challenging read. The first chapter. So don't be intimidated by the first chapter. It's not as accessible initially, seemingly not as accessible as you get into it, because it's written in a very challenging way, like how a professor, would write the book. But don't be intimidated by that. You know, just get what you can out of it, and we'll go through the first chapter. I can answer any questions or help you understand what's going on in the first chapter. But don't be intimidated by the first chapter. Just try to get into it. The later chapters are basically a collection of essays, partially essay, partially memoir about a lot of her experiences. And they can be read as separate entities too. And they cover a lot of interesting things. So in a way, later in the book, she does get the writing becomes more accessible. She becomes more personable, and she varies her writing style. So don't initially judge the book too harshly on the first chapter, because the book becomes more accessible later with a lot of common themes, and it kind of gets into why I wanted to choose the book. Because basically, she talks about her struggles as a Haitian American immigrant artist, as a writer, as being an artist. So she basically came. Her parents. She was born at the time in Haiti, where there was a dictator named Papa Doc Duvalier. He was a very famous dictator. He was very corrupt, a very harsh dictator, and he executed a lot of people and so forth, just like what a dictator would do. And her parents uh, fled from Haiti, to get away from his influence, because they objected to his dictatorship. And of course, people who object to a dictatorship would actually be possibly executed or murdered and so forth, their family, themselves, or their friends. So that's very harsh to be under a dictatorship. So her parents got away to New York in America, and she eventually stayed in Haiti for a while. Dandicott, and eventually joined her parents while she was young. And then while she was young, she experienced that tough immigrant lifestyle, like as a young Haitian American girl trying to fit into the tough elementary school and high school, elementary school, middle school, and high school in New York. So she basically had a lot of her tough experiences as an immigrant, as a lot of us can relate to, being a minority child and being teased and so forth, being Haitian and being in the minority. But she persevered through her struggles and eventually became got her degree at Barnard College, which was a very famous college in the East, and eventually got her master's degree in creative writing from Brown University. And Brown University is actually one of the elite schools in America too. One of the Ivy schools, I believe, very prestigious university. Brown University is very famous, very excellent university. So she rose from a very challenging lifestyle as a poor young immigrant who fled from Haiti, and her parents fled from Haiti too, to get a master's degree and eventually become a professor. And she eventually wrote a novel that she talked about in the book, and she eventually wrote these collection of essays, which she was also she lectured on these essays at Princeton University as part of the Toni Morrison series, and these essays became inspiration for this book she wrote called Create Dangerously. So this Create Dangerously book is actually based on her a collection of essays that she lectured on. it was inspired by her lecture at the Princeton University in the Toni Morrison lecture series, and she's essays became the basis or inspiration for this book here. And this book here is a collection of essays. But eventually, so the essays talks about a lot of topics, and a very famous thing about this book, it was chosen to be a book in Oprah Winfrey's Book of the Month Club. So it's very famous. So she connects to real life where Oprah Winfrey connected her, and also Oprah Winfrey's readers and audience connected to Danticott. So Danticott basically became a professor. She became an author. And in 2018, about 8 years after this book was published, about 7 or 8 years, I think this book was published in 2011. In 2018, this book was chosen by the University of Kansas to be the common book for first-year students. So that means that all first-year students at Kansas University, a very big and prestigious university in Kansas, one of the best, and the Kansas Jayhawks, one of the top college basketball teams. We got a number of national championships. So we're very aware of the University of Kansas, their great sports background, their academic background. They're one of the biggest universities in Kansas, a very large university. So basically, this huge university chose her book as a common book for the first-year students, which means the book would be circulated and given to all first-year students and be a topic of discussion in their classrooms and also through the university community. So the university community, in terms, because they know that a lot of big issues today, we have issues with citizenship, race, immigration. These are all hot topics, a la Donald Trump, right? We have a big controversy in the last 4 or 5 years about immigration, especially. That's been going on for many years. So you can see how this connects. Like, she's a Haitian American. A lot of us come from different backgrounds. I'm an Asian American. My parents were immigrants. A lot of you are also immigrants too, or basically you know about your classmates who are immigrants, and you know a lot of people who are immigrants. So there's a lot of issues with immigrants coming to USA in terms of their citizenship, ethnicity, race, their identity, controversies with immigrants, their struggles, their triumphs, and them being a part of America. It's also the most important thing, how they navigate that connection into their homeland or their land that they came from. Also issues with generations, right? You have immigrant parents, right? And maybe the kids are actually born here in the USA, so they're actually like the child of immigrants. There's still a lot of issues, yet those kids are still connected to their parents and also to the original country too. So there's a lot of issues with immigrants. In Danticott, as a Haitian American, again, we may not be Haitian American, but we can see that connection. And the Haitian Americans have a very infamous connection to the USA, as you will see in the book. Unfortunately, Trump, in his first few years of his presidency, there was a White House meeting. This was noted in the Washington Post that when they were talking about immigrants from various African countries, and also Haiti was also a country that was discussed in the immigration numbers and quotas and policy. Trump allegedly referred to Haiti in very derogatory terms. I won't get too much into it, but he basically put down Haiti country as a whole, and say why can't we just have more immigrants from Norway or some other countries, right? So he's trying to favor the Northern European countries against Haiti. So basically, he sort of denigrated Haiti, and Haiti is very famous because Haiti is the first country that they're basically a country of slaves, originally of slaves, and they basically gained their freedom and independence from France. One of the colonial powers. They are the first African nation to gain their freedom. Descendants of the African nation to gain their freedom from France. So they're very famous. Haiti has a very proud history, and they're connected to the USA, as we shall see in the book. Not only do they have to overcome their colonial oppressors from France, but yet France is still part of their history. There's a Creole language spoken in Haiti. And also Haiti, they have a lot of the French influence. So again, you have the colonial oppressors, yet France is still part of their history, right? So they have a lot of the love or traditions for France in there, right? And that's pretty common among nations that are colonized before. And now you also have the USA, and of course the USA exploited Haiti, as we learn in the Danticott book in one of the later chapters, how USA has a very notorious history with Haiti, and yet it's very well unknown, right? Because we don't often, many people in history, when we read history books, is Haiti ever mentioned? They don't really care about that Haiti was invaded by the U.S., but that actually occurred, right? We can see the significance, right? They don't care about Haiti, that Haiti was invaded upon by the U.S. and exploited by the U.S. If people don't care, that's a problem too, right? That shows a lot of American attitudes where there's this historic event that they don't even know about, right? And they don't even care about. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but it's also the book is very there's going to be a lot of issues with the book that we're going to bring up. The first chapter establishes the themes of the book. So again, it's difficult because she talks a lot. First, she introduces a couple of Haitian American college students who were able to escape from Haiti, the dictator, but they returned, right? They escaped, yet they saw, just like Gibson saw, that they want to come back to their country and help the great Haitian citizens who were actually oppressed by Duvalier, and they came back as freedom fighters. But unfortunately, they were caught, and Duvalier put them up. Duvalier, the dictator, put them up for public execution. But Danticott talks about that historical event that happened about in the mid '60s. And then she brings that up and shows how she was inspired by that, right? Saddened yet inspired by how those Haitian young men came back to try to help Haiti, yet they met their death by execution. So she talks about that. She also brings up the fact of the artists creating dangerously for readers who read dangerously. So basically, the artists, as a writer and other artists, actually create dangerously. What does that mean? To create dangerously means that maybe sometimes these immigrants create things at the risk of dying, right? Dictators can just read their book and say, "Oh, I don't agree with this. I want to kill them," right? So basically, USA, we have a lot of freedoms with our writing and so forth. Yet these artists, writers, artists, painters, sculptors, musicians, playwrights, people, actors, so forth, they have less freedom in countries like Haiti. And that continues on until today, right? So what about the artists who create dangerously? For the readers who read dangerously, right? You can actually be banned. You can have books being banned, or you can actually be killed for reading books that they deem dangerous. So they talk about how Haitians are under that were under that oppression. The history of Haiti actually sadly continued, right? They're a very poor country. Right after they gained their freedom and independence, that they're ruled constantly by ever changing governments, like military governments, very dictators, very bad leaders, and that kind of contributed to their economic and political ruin as we go through. So Haiti is a very country that's very struggling, right? Often derisively called a third world country by the U.S., but Haiti keeps on going. And today Haiti is actually a democracy. They're trying hard, yet they also are trying to overcome a lot of things, right? There was that 2010 devastating earthquake that destroyed their capital, Port-au-Prince, and killed hundreds of thousands of Haitians. And she talks about it in the book, right? Now, how they actually overcame this tragedy, and they're still trying to repair that tragedy, not trying to rebuild up to today. So Haiti is a country that has not very well known among a lot of people in the world, but very poor, very oppressed, yet has a lot of hope, with a lot of great people. And there's a lot of Haitian immigrants who come to the USA and have that diaspora where they're actually connected to their home country, like their immigrants are actually in the USA as Haitian Americans, yet they're still connected to their home country. And we can see the similarities too. So as we read through the book, you're going to get a chance in your second essay to do a little research and also pick a topic that relates to Danticott, such as immigration and so forth, and maybe try to connect. A lot of you would maybe try to connect the issue of immigration, the controversial issues with immigration, to the Haitian Americans too, right? So basically, you could talk about immigration and connect it to the Danticott book. And Danticott would talk about a lot of other subjects, how the USA connects to Haiti. How the USA also oppressed Haiti. Little known fact: France is considered the main oppressor as a colonial nation, but the USA also has its influence. So how the USA oppressed Haiti in the past, yet how she connects with the USA now as a Haitian American today. So there's going to be a lot of topics, and I'll talk more about the book in later lectures. But I just wanted to introduce you to the book. Just take a look at the first chapter. It introduces you to the major themes It may be difficult to understand, but bear with it because it's actually very good. It talks about the major, some of the key themes. In chapter 2, gets a little bit more accessible. It talks about how she visits her aunt in Haiti. And basically, that's also an interesting issue too, because it shows sometimes we go back to our home country, or I went back to Hong Kong in the year 2000, right? And that was a very interesting experience because my parents, my mom was from Hong Kong, my dad was also from nearby China. So that's also very interesting too. She talks about that, and then later chapters will get more accessible, and I'll get into the later chapters. But for now, try to get into the book. It's going to be a challenge. Not as successful as Glass Castle, but read it with open mind. You know, it may not be your favorite book, but there will definitely be some things that connect to you. And Danticott talked about there in her introduction. She wanted her students at Kansas University that she wanted to meet them and talk about how they connected. How can they connect it? You know, can they see poverty in the U.S.? Like some of the students think that there's no poverty here yet. Danticott wants to tell them that there's poverty in Haiti, yet there's also poverty and homelessness here, so that students can still connect to your book just by looking at their immediate environment or the USA. So Danticott wanted to connect to her students and wanted to see that the book connects to their students' lives. The book students would seemingly say, "Oh, this book, I don't know anything about Haiti. It's a tough book to get into. I'm not really Haitian, right? You know, I might be Chinese, or I might be white, or I might be Latino. I don't really get into it." But she says, "Oh, but look at our similarities. We are connected in ways that we don't think about immediately, but we're all connected as Americans, and there's a lot of connection there." So Danticott wants to establish a connection with the author, and hopefully, as you read through the first chapters, we'll start seeing that connection. So until then, we'll get more into the book, but until then, enjoy the book. It'll be a challenge, but hopefully it'll be a good read, interesting read, and we'll talk more about the book later. Okay, thank you. Good night.